stars flickers against the eternal void. Ancient tombs lie buried beneath worlds that have forgotten their names. These are not the crypts of mortal civilizations, those fleeting empires that rise and fall within the span of a few thousand years. No, these are the resting places of something far older, far more terrible. These are the tomb worlds of the Necrons, and within their silent halls, machines that have slept for 60 million years wait in patient stillness for the moment of their awakening. But what happens when something intrudes upon that ancient sleep? What occurs when the orderly perfection of Necron technology encounters the maddening chaos of the warp? What transpires when the most advanced civilization the galaxy has ever known finds itself face to face with corruption incarnate, wrapped in a shell of twisted metal and screaming flesh? This is the story of an impossible encounter, a meeting between two forces that should never have crossed paths. This is what happens when Necrons find a Chaos Dreadnought in their tomb. The scenario might seem impossible at first consideration. How could a massive war machine of the Traitor Legions possibly find its way into the sealed chambers of a Necron tomb world? The Necrons are masters of dimensional science. Their tombs protected by technologies that make a mockery of conventional physics. Their defenses include phase shift generators that can move entire sections of their complexes out of sync with normal reality, Gauss pylons capable of stripping matter down to its constituent atoms, scarab swarms that can detect and eliminate any intrusion before it poses a threat to the slumbering nobles within. These defenses have stood for 60 million years, repelling countless would-be invaders and weathering the slow erosion of time itself without degradation or failure. The tomb's outer perimeter alone represents a defensive achievement that would humble the greatest fortress builders of the Imperium. Kilometers beneath the planet's surface, blackstone and living metal create a barrier that exists partially outside normal space. Sensors scan across multiple dimensions simultaneously, detecting threats that conventional security systems would miss entirely. Auto-reactive defense systems respond to intrusions within nanoseconds, deploying countermeasures specifically calibrated to the nature of each threat. A single footstep on the planet's surface, if it falls in the wrong location, can trigger responses that range from localized phase shifts to planet-wide dimensional anchors that prevent any form of teleportation or warp travel within the system. Yet the galaxy is vast and strange, and in the grim darkness of the far future, impossible events occur with disturbing regularity. Perhaps a massive warp storm, one of those reality-shearing tempests that tear through the material universe like claws through parchment, deposited the corrupted machine directly into the tomb's lower levels. The warp cares nothing for the laws of physics or the boundaries between dimensions. When the immaterium bleeds into real space, anything becomes possible. A hellbrute fighting on one world could find itself elsewhere entirely, transported across space and time by energies that mock the very concept of distance. Consider the nature of such storms. They are not mere weather phenomena, or even conventional space-time disruptions. Warp storms are literal tears in the fabric of reality, places where the immaterium pours into the material universe with all the force of an ocean rushing through a breach in a dam. Within the boundaries of a warp storm, the normal rules that govern existence simply cease to apply. Time can flow backward or sideways, or not at all. Space folds in on itself, creating impossible geometries that would drive a human observer mad simply to behold. Objects can exist in multiple locations simultaneously to exist only to reappear somewhere else entirely. A hellbrute caught in such a storm would experience sensations beyond any form of torture. Its already fractured consciousness would be pulled apart and reassembled in configurations that bore no relationship to sanity or reason. It might live through the same moment 1,000 times, each iteration slightly different, or it might experience the heat death of the universe condensed into a single subjective instant. And then, when the storm finally released it, it could emerge anywhere in the galaxy, or beyond, with no relationship between where it entered the storm and where it departed. If this is how our Hellbrute arrived in the tomb, it would explain that initially confused the tomb mind. The temporal distortions associated with warp travel would account for the fluctuating mass readings, as the Hellbrute's particles existed partially in multiple time streams simultaneously. The dimensional phasing would explain why the construct appeared to occupy different amounts of space depending on which sensors were examining it. And the residual warp energies clinging to its frame would create precisely the sort of reality distortions that the tomb mind initially classified as sensor malfunctions. Or perhaps the intrusion occurred during the tomb's initial construction, millions of years before the Necrons entered their great sleep. The world that became a tomb might once have been a battlefield, and the dreadnought, already ancient even then, could have been buried by tectonic shifts and geological upheaval. This scenario, while seemingly less dramatic than a warp storm, carries its own profound implications. It suggests that the Hellbrute has been sitting dormant beneath the planet's surface for millions of years, its corrupted systems in some form of stasis that prevented complete degradation. Imagine the geological processes required to bury a war machine the size of a dreadnought so deeply that it would end up within a structure built kilometers underground. The planet itself would need to be geologically active, with tectonic plates grinding against each other, with sufficient force to subduct surface material into the mantle. Over millions of years, layer upon layer of sediment would accumulate, compressing and transforming under immense pressure into solid rock. The battlefield, where the Hellbrute fell, would be buried beneath mountains, those mountains worn down by erosion and covered by new formations, the cycle repeating until the original surface lay kilometers below the current ground level. The Necrons, when they chose this world for a tomb, would have scanned it extensively, mapping its internal structure and identifying optimal locations for their stasis chambers. But their scans were calibrated to detect threats and unsuitable geological formations, not to identify individual artifacts that might be buried in the deep strata. A Hellbrute, its power systems cold and dark, its corrupted machine spirit dormant, would register as nothing more than an unusually dense rock formation, if it registered at all. The Necrons would have built their tomb around it, never knowing that beneath their carefully engineered chambers lay a time bomb that would not detonate for millions of years. A third possibility involves the chaotic nature of teleportation technology in the hands of those who serve the Dark Gods. Chaos Space Marines are known to use crude teleportation devices, warp-touched artifacts that tear holes in reality to move troops and war machines across vast distances. These devices are inherently unstable, prone to catastrophic failures that can deposit their cargo into solid rock, the void of space, or dimensions that should not exist. A Hellbrute, teleporting into what its corrupted machine spirit believed to be a battlefield, might instead materialize deep within a Necron tomb, its arrival undetected by defenses that were never calibrated to recognize threats emerging from within. The mechanics of chaos teleportation are as horrifying as they are effective. Unlike Imperial teleportation technology, which uses carefully calculated mathematical models to punch temporary holes through the warp, chaos teleportation relies on the whims of demonic entities to facilitate transport. A chaos sorcerer might bargain with a daemon of Tziench, offering its souls or secrets in exchange for passage through the immaterium. Or a warpsmith might construct a teleportation device, powered by bound daemons, each one screaming in eternal torment as it tears reality apart to fulfill its function. These methods work, after a fashion, but they are subject to the capricious nature of the entities that make them possible. A daemon might fulfill the letter of a bargain while violating its spirit, depositing troops in the location requested but thousands of years in the past or future. A bound daemon might rebel against its constraints, sending its cargo to some nightmare realm instead of the intended destination. Or the sheer chaos of the warp might interfere with the teleportation process, scattering individual molecules across light years or merging multiple beings into single horrifying amalgamations. In this scenario, the Hellbrute was likely part of a larger force attempting to teleport onto a battlefield. Perhaps its warband was assaulting an Imperial fortress, and the Hellbrute was meant to materialize in the heart of the enemy stronghold, sowing chaos and destruction while its comrades attacked from without. The teleportation was initiated, reality was torn open, and the Hellbrute stepped through the bleeding wound between dimensions. But something went wrong. Perhaps the sorcerer performing the ritual made an error in the complex incantations required to guide the teleportation. Perhaps the daemon facilitating the transport decided to play a cruel joke on its supposed masters. Or perhaps the Hellbrute's own corrupted nature interfered with the process, its warp-saturated systems creating interference that disrupted the carefully balanced energies of the teleportation. Whatever the cause, the Hellbrute emerged not on a battlefield, but in a chamber deep within a Necron tomb, materializing in a restricted sector where no conscious mind had set foot in millions of years. The tomb's defenses, sophisticated as they are, were not designed to detect threats that appear from nowhere. Their sensors scan for physical intrusions, for energy signatures that indicate incoming attacks, for the specific gravitational and electromagnetic signatures associated with spacecraft or armies on the march. But a single entity materializing directly within the tomb's boundaries, bypassing all physical barriers, would not trigger the standard alert protocols. It would simply appear, as if it had always been there, and the sensors would register it only when they happened to scan the specific location where it materialized. However it arrived, the result is the same: an abomination of flesh, metal, and demonic corruption now sits within the sacred precincts of a tomb world, its very presence an affront to everything the Necrons represent. The tomb, built to be a sanctuary from the chaos of the galaxy, a place where the Necrons could sleep in perfect stillness until the time of awakening, has been violated. The intrusion might be accidental, might be the result of forces beyond anyone's control, but that does not diminish its significance. A wound has been opened in the tomb's perfect order, and like any wound, it will fester if not treated with extreme prejudice. To understand the magnitude of this intrusion, we must first comprehend what a Necron tomb world truly is. These are not simple burial grounds or military installations. They are engineering marvels on a scale that makes the greatest achievements of the Imperium look like children's toys. Each tomb world is a planet-spanning complex of stasis chambers, power matrices, and dimensional labyrinths that exist partially outside normal space-time. The technology involved in their construction predates human civilization by tens of millions of years, drawing on scientific principles that the tech priests of Mars would consider miraculous or impossible. The architecture of a tomb world defies conventional description. To an observer standing in one of its halls, the space might appear to be a simple corridor of black stone and living metal, perhaps 100 meters long and 10 meters high. Yet that same corridor might actually contain thousands of stasis chambers, phased into pocket dimensions, and accessible only through careful manipulation of the tomb's reality warping technologies. The Necrons mastered interdimensional geometry long before humanity's ancestors climbed down from the trees. They can fold space like origami, creating volumes that are impossibly larger on the inside than the outside. This is no simple computer. The tomb mind is a gestalt consciousness formed from millions of the tomb's function, from the status of individual stasis chambers to the positions of defensive weapons systems scattered across the planet's surface. The tomb mind never sleeps, never rests, never ceases its eternal vigil over the masters it serves. When the tomb world is dormant, as most have been for millions of years, the tomb mind operates on minimal power, its attention focused on basic maintenance and threat detection. But it is always watching, always calculating, always prepared to initiate defense pro sleeping nobles in its care. Its decision-making matrix is programmed with countless, each designed to respond to specific types of intrusions with appropriate levels of force. A small group of scavengers might warrant deployment of a few scarab swarms. A full-scale invasion force could trigger the awakening of the tomb mind does not panic or hesitate. It simply begins running through its vast library of response protocols, searching for the one that best fits the data it is receiving. And the data it receives from this intrusion is deeply fundamentally wrong. But before the tomb mind can formulate its response, we must understand what, exactly, has violated the sanctity of the tomb. The Chaos Dreadnought, or more accurately the Hellbrute as it is known in the current age, represents one of the most tragic and horrifying fates that can befall a space marine who has fallen to chaos. Where Imperial Dreadnoughts are revered as honored ancients, wise veterans whose counsel is sought in matters of war and strategy, Chaos Dreadnoughts are feared and shackled, treated as rabid beasts that must be contained between battles. The process of creating a Hellbrute begins with a space marine who has been catastrophically wounded, their body too damaged to survive without mechanical augmentation. In loyal chapters, this would be an honor. To be interred within a dreadnought is to be given eternal life, a chance to serve the Emperor for millennia beyond a normal space marine's already extended lifespan. The process is solemn and sacred, conducted by the chapter's most skilled tech marines and blessed by its highest-ranking chaplains. The space marine being interred is treated with the utmost reverence, for they are sacrificing their remaining mortal existence to become something greater, a living weapon that will serve their chapter for countless battles to come. But in the traitor legions and renegade warbands, the process has become corrupted by 10,000 years of exposure to warp energies. The reverence is gone, replaced by desperate necessity, or worse, by deliberate cruelty. Some Chaos Lords use internment in a dreadnought as a punishment for those who have failed them, condemning warriors who angered their superiors to an eternity of torment within a metal shell. Others view it as simply another tool, a way to salvage valuable combat assets that would otherwise be lost to battle damage. The sarcophagus itself, the armored shell that contains what remains of the Space Marine's body, becomes a prison of torment rather than a sanctuary of preservation. Unlike Imperial Dreadnoughts, which place their occupant in a dreamless sleep between battles, Chaos Dreadnoughts remain conscious, trapped within the confines of their metal shell, with nothing but their own maddening thoughts for company. Hours stretch into days, days into years, years into centuries. There is no escape, no relief, only the endless awareness of their confinement. Imagine experiencing such an existence. You are aware, fully conscious, but completely disconnected from the world outside your metal shell. You cannot feel the touch of wind on your skin, for you have no skin. You cannot smell the acrid bite of ozone after a lightning strike, for you have no nose. You cannot taste food or water, for you consume neither. Every human sense has been stripped away, replaced by cold data feeds from mechanical sensors that translate reality into numbers and wavelengths. You see through optical arrays that render everything in false color thermal overlays. You hear through audio pickups that filter out frequencies that organic ears could perceive. You feel through pressure sensors that detect force, but cannot experience texture or temperature in any meaningful way. And you are alone. Utterly, completely alone. There are no companions to speak with, no comrades to share the burden of your existence. The other members of your warband go about their lives, fighting and feasting and indulging in whatever perversions their particular chaos god demands. While you sit in darkness, a consciousness trapped in a box, counting the seconds until you are next needed. Some Imperial Dreadnoughts report that their time in stasis passes instantaneously, that one moment they are being sealed away and the next they are awakening for deployment, with no subjective experience of the time between. For Chaos Dreadnoughts, there is no such mercy. Every second of every hour of every year is experienced in full, agonizing awareness. But the corruption goes deeper than mere psychological torment. The warp itself seeps into the dreadnought systems, drawn by the negative emotions of rage, despair, and hatred emanating from the trapped space marine. These psychic emanations act as a beacon, attracting the attention of entities that dwell in the immaterium. Daemons whisper in the darkness, their voices promising power, freedom, vengeance. They tell the imprisoned warrior that they can grant him release, that they can restore what was taken, that they can make him whole again. Sometimes the promises are true, in their own twisted way. More often, they are simply another layer of torment heaped upon the damned soul within. The daemons are patient, for time means nothing to them. They whisper and cajole and tempt, wearing away at the Space Marine's sanity like water eroding stone. Even the strongest will eventually begin to crack under this relentless psychic assault. The Space Marine might resist for decades, might maintain his mental discipline through sheer force of will and whatever scraps of faith or purpose remain to him, but eventually, inevitably, something gives way. Perhaps it's just a momentary lapse, a single instant where the defenses drop and the demon's words strike home. That's all it takes. Once the breach is made, the corruption floods in like poison through a wound. Over time, something truly horrifying begins to occur. The flesh of the entombed Space Marine starts to fuse with the metal of the dreadnought chassis. This is not a metaphor or a figure of speech. The actual cellular structure of the Space Marine's remaining organic tissue begins to interweave with the inorganic materials of the sarcophagus and chassis. Muscle tissue grows into hydraulic systems, individual muscle fibers wrapping around pistons and servos, contracting and expanding in sync with the mechanical movements they now augment. Bone melds with adamantium plating, the calcium matrix of skeletal tissue bonding at the molecular level with the artificially hardened metal. Nerves intertwine with circuitry in ways that should be impossible, but somehow function through the reality-warping influence of chaos, creating hybrid pathways that transmit both bioelectric impulses and electronic signals. The line between marine and machine blurs and then disappears entirely. What emerges is neither flesh nor metal, but something in between, a hybrid monstrosity that defies natural law. The Hellbrute's armor is not merely worn, but grown, extruded from internal organs that have been transformed into biological forges. Its weapons are not attached, but integrated. Neural pathways connecting directly to targeting systems and firing mechanisms. The sarcophagus that once protected the Space Marine's body now contains something that can barely be called a body at all. A mass of tissues and circuitry, organs and wiring, all functioning together in a nightmarish parody of life. The pilot's consciousness, such as it remains, becomes fractured and incoherent. They experience the world through both organic senses and mechanical senses, creating a nightmarish dual perception that no mortal mind was designed to process. They feel both the phantom pain of their long-destroyed organic body, the ghost sensations of limbs that were amputated centuries ago, and the stress fractures in their armored shell, the micro-tears in metal plates that they somehow perceive as wounds in their own flesh. They hunger for battle, not out of duty or strategy, but out of pure, desperate need. Combat is the only time when the madness recedes slightly, when the act of killing provides a momentary focus that silences the screaming voices in their mind. When deployed for battle, a Hellbrute is a terrifying sight. It moves with jerky, spasmodic motions, as if the various systems that control its movements are fighting each other for dominance. Its weapons track targets with disturbing precision one moment and spray fire wildly the next. As control shifts between the pilot's degraded conscious mind and autonomous systems that function according to their own corrupted logic, the sounds it makes are perhaps worst of all mechanical grinding mixed with organic screaming, the whir of servos harmonizing with agonized howls that issue from vox speakers never meant to replicate the human voice. Other Chaos Space Marines fear and despise the Hellbrutes in their ranks. They see in them a possible future for themselves, a fate that might await any warrior who suffers grievous injury. The Hellbrutes are kept shackled between battles, massive chains binding their limbs, and weapon systems locked down by arcane mechanisms. These restraints are as much for the warband's protection as for anyone else's. A Hellbrute awakening unexpectedly might lash out at anything nearby, making no distinction between ally and enemy in its maddened rage. Some warbands have lost valuable warriors to Hellbrutes that broke free from their restraints and rampaged through their own battle barges. The creation process for a Hellbrute particularly among the traitor legions that have made a science of it, involves deliberate torture. The Thousand Sons, in particular, have refined the process into a ritual of supreme cruelty. Would-be Hellbrute pilots undergo a series of trials, each designed to bind their soul to the machine they will inhabit. These trials are not tests of worth or demonstrations of devotion, but simply mechanisms to ensure the fusion process will proceed correctly. The candidate is subjected to warp energies that flay their soul, preparing it to bond with the demonic essence that will be introduced into the dreadnought chassis. Then comes the flensing. The candidate's body is systematically reduced, flesh burned away by warp flame until only the essential organs remain. The sorcerers conducting the ritual work with precision, ensuring that the victim remains conscious throughout, for their screams and suffering feed the ritual's power. When only a mass of organs, bones, and nerve fibers remain still alive, still aware this ruined thing is placed in an amniotic sac filled with nutrient fluids and alchemical compounds. The sac is then inserted into the Hellbrute's sarcophagus, where integration begins immediately. The victim feels everything. They feel the tendrils of corrupted metal burrowing into what remains of their flesh. They feel their nerves being fused with fiber optic cables. They feel their cardiovascular system being tapped by the Hellbrute's coolant loops. And they feel their mind being pulled apart and rewoven, thoughts and memories scrambled and reconfigured to interface with the machine's systems. The process can take days or weeks, during which the victim cannot sleep, cannot lose consciousness, cannot escape. By the time it's complete, what emerges is barely recognizable as the warrior who entered the sarcophagus. This is the thing that now sits within the Necron tomb. Thousands of tons of corrupted ceramite, demonic flesh, and warp-touched machinery, all animated by a consciousness that barely qualifies as sane. Its massive form hunches in the darkness of the tomb's lower levels. Power systems in standby mode, weapon arrays dormant. Perhaps it believes itself to still be on a battlefield somewhere, its fractured mind unable to distinguish between reality and the nightmares that plague its every waking moment. Perhaps it is simply dormant, conserving power while it waits for orders from commanders who may be dead or light years distant. Or perhaps, in whatever passes for its dreams, it relives the moment of its transformation over and over, trapped in an eternal loop of pain and corruption from which there is no escape. The Hellbrute's weapons tell their own story of degradation and corruption. What was once a standard Imperial multi-melter has been warped by centuries of exposure to the warp. Its barrel is no longer straight but curves in ways that make no geometric sense, following angles that should be impossible in three-dimensional space. The weapon's housing is covered in growths that resemble tumors, each one pulsing with its own hideous vitality. When the weapon fires, it does not merely emit a beam of thermal energy, but also releases waves of psychic torment, inflicting pain on targets, even if the thermal component misses its mark. The Power Fist, that quintessential close combat weapon of Space Marines, has become something far worse. The energy field that surrounds it no longer simply disrupts molecular bonds on contact. Now it tears at the very fabric of reality, creating micro-tears into the warp with each blow. Enemies struck by the Power Fist do not merely die, they are partially pulled into the immaterium, experiencing a moment of utter horror as they glimpse the entities that dwell there before their corporeal forms are destroyed. The fist itself has grown organic components, finger-like protrusions that flex and grasp independent of the Hellbrute's control, as if the weapon has developed its own primitive hunger. Even the Hellbrute's armor plating tells a story of progressive corruption. What should be smooth ceramite is instead covered in baroque decorations that were never applied by any artificer's hand. Faces push out from the metal, their features frozen in expressions of agony or ecstasy. Symbols writhe across the surface, changing configuration depending on the angle from which they're viewed. Some portions of the armor appear to breathe, expanding and contracting rhythmically, despite being solid metal. Other sections weep ichor, viscous fluids of indeterminate origin that drip constantly from joints and seams. This corruption extends beyond the merely physical. The Hellbrute's presence creates a zone of reality distortion around itself, a bubble of space-time where the normal laws of physics apply only intermittently. Chronometers malfunction in its vicinity, running backward or jumping forward randomly. Gravity fluctuates, creating pockets where objects float free or are crushed by forces many times normal. The very air feels wrong, charged with energies that make human flesh crawl and machine spirits whimper in electronic distress. Plants wither in its presence, their cellular structure unable to maintain integrity when exposed to the warp-touched aura the Hellbrute radiates. Whatever its mental state, its presence registers immediately on the tomb mind's detection systems. At first, the readings make no sense. The sensors detect mass, certainly. Something large and metallic occupies space in Sector 7 Theta Prim, a restricted area that should contain nothing but backup power conduits and emergency stasis chambers. But the readings are contradictory, fluctuating in ways that suggest errors in the sensor array itself. The object's mass varies moment by moment, shifting between readings that suggest a heavy battle tank and others that indicate something far smaller. Its composition defies analysis. Scans indicate adamantium, ceramite, plasteel, all materials the tomb mind recognizes from its vast database of younger race technologies. But there are other readings too, substances that register as organic tissue yet possess properties that biological matter should not have. And strangest of all, there is something in the readings that suggests the object exists partially in another dimension, phasing in and out of normal space-time in irregular patterns. The tomb mind runs diagnostic routines on its sensor arrays. All systems report normal function. The anomalous readings are not the result of equipment malfunction. There is actually something down there, something that should not exist according to the physical laws that the Necrons used to conquer the galaxy millions of years before humanity discovered fire. Protocol requires investigation before escalation. The tomb mind cannot justify awakening the nobles for what might be a simple malfunction or harmless curiosity. Resources must be conserved. The Great Sleep is meant to last until the proper time for awakening, and premature resurrection of even a single noble wastes energy that might be needed in the future. So, the tomb mind does what it always does. In situations requiring investigation of unknown anomalies, it deploys the Canoptech constructs. Deep within the tomb's maintenance levels, systems that have been dormant for millions of years suddenly flicker to life. Power flows through crystalline pathways, energizing circuits that were designed before Earth's sun ignited. In chambers scattered throughout the complex, the Canoptech scarabs begin to stir. These constructs are marvels of miniaturization, each one no larger than a human hand, but containing technology more sophisticated than anything the Imperium has ever produced. They are not truly alive, possessing neither consciousness nor will, but they are far more than simple drones. Each scarab contains a fragment of adaptive programming, allowing it to respond to changing circumstances without requiring constant direction from the tomb mind. They can coordinate with each other, forming gestalt intelligences that can solve complex problems through emergent behavior patterns. The scarab's primary function is repair and maintenance, and at this they are without equal in the galaxy. Their molecular disassembly beams can break down any substance into its component atoms, storing the energy in internal matrices for later use. That same energy can then be reconstituted into new forms, allowing the scarabs to manufacture anything from simple replacement components to entirely new constructs. Given enough time and resources, a sufficient swarm of scarabs could build a battleship from raw minerals, or reduce a hive city to its constituent elements. But they also serve as the tomb's reconnaissance units, and it is in this capacity that they now deploy. Dozens of scarabs emerge from hidden maintenance ports, their anti-gravitic engines humming at frequencies just below human hearing. They move through the tomb's corridors in a loose swarm, chittering to each other in high-bandwidth data bursts as they share sensor readings and coordinate their approach vectors. The tomb mind observes through their compound eyes, seeing the ancient corridors from dozens of perspectives simultaneously. The scarabs descend through levels that have not been traversed in 60 million years, past stasis chambers containing legions of Necron warriors frozen in timeless sleep, through halls where dust has never settled, because there is no air to carry it. The tomb is a place of perfect preservation, its environmental controls maintaining a near-total vacuum in most sections. Only the scarabs move through this stillness, disturbing nothing, as they glide towards Sector 7 Theta Prim. As they approach the location of the anomaly, their sensors begin to register increasingly strange readings. The temperature in this sector is higher than it should be by several degrees. There are trace molecules in the air that should not exist in a properly sealed section of the tomb. Something is generating heat and atmosphere in an area that has been airless and frozen for longer than human civilization has existed. The scarabs enter the chamber where the anomaly is located, and for 1.7 milliseconds, the tomb mind experiences something that might be called confusion, if it were capable of emotion. The data streaming from the scarab sensors is even more contradictory than the long-range scans suggested. There, dominating the center of the chamber, is indeed a war machine of some kind. Its general configuration is familiar from the tomb mind's database of younger race military equipment. It matches the basic profile of what Imperial forces call a dreadnought, though there are significant deviations from the standard design templates. But the deviations are what trouble the tomb mind. The machine's armor, which should be smooth ceramite plating, instead appears to be covered in growths that resemble organic tissue. Muscle fibers, or something that mimics them, writhe across the surface of the metal. The pilot sarcophagus, visible through gaps in the corrupted plating, pulses with a rhythmic motion that suggests breathing or a heartbeat, despite being constructed from non-living materials. Worse still are the energy signatures. The scarabs detect fluctuations in local reality, small tears in the fabric of space-time that pulse in time with the sarcophagus's movements. These are phenomena the tomb mind recognizes from ancient records, classified in its databases under designations that translate roughly as warp intrusion and immaterial contamination. This is not simply a damaged war machine. This is something that has been touched by the realm of chaos, that nightmare dimension that the Necrons despise above all others. The scarabs move closer, their programming directing them to establish the precise nature of the threat. Several land on the Hellbrute's armored shell, their molecular analysis beams playing across its surface. The readings they send back are profoundly disturbing. The armor is not dead metal, not in the way that Necron materials are living metal, but in a far more literal and horrifying sense. There are actual biological processes occurring within and on the surface of the ceramite. Cells divide, proteins fold and unfold, chemical reactions proceed that have no business occurring in inorganic matter. One of the scarabs begins to cut into the armor, intending to take a sample for more detailed analysis. Its cutting beam, capable of slicing through the hull of a battleship given enough time, makes contact with the corrupted plating. For a moment, the beam does its work, carving a microscopic line into the surface. Then, the Hellbrute awakens. The universe has mechanisms for detecting predators, responses hardwired so deeply into living beings that they operate below the level of conscious thought. The Hellbrute, for all its corruption and madness, retains these instincts. Even in standby mode, even with its higher functions dormant, it feels the scarab's cutting beam as pain. And pain, after centuries of torment, is something it knows intimately. Its optical sensors snap online, flooding with data after what might have been moments or millennia of darkness. Its corrupted consciousness struggles to process what it sees. It expected a battlefield, enemies to kill, targets for its rage. Instead, it finds itself in a chamber of black stone and metal, surrounded by small mechanical creatures that are trying to dissect its armored shell. The madness that has consumed the Hellbrute's pilot over centuries of confinement does not allow for rational thought or strategic analysis. It recognizes only threat and prey. These things are attacking it. Therefore, they must be destroyed. The Hellbrute's massive frame surges into full activation, power flowing through corrupted systems as weapons arrays come online. Its power fist, a close combat weapon the size of a space marine, lashes out with speed that seems impossible for something so massive. 3 scarabs are pulverized instantly, their delicate systems crushed into component atoms. The others scatter, their programming recognizing immediate danger and ordering tactical withdrawal. But the Hellbrute is faster than it has any right to be. Its other arm, mounting a massive multi-melter, swings in a wide arc. The targeting system, corrupted by millennia of exposure to the warp, no longer functions properly. But at this range, accuracy is irrelevant. The multi-melter fires, its beam designed to melt through the heaviest armor at ranges of several hundred meters. At point-blank range, against targets as small and delicate as Canoptek scarabs, the effect is catastrophic. A dozen constructs simply cease to exist, vaporized so completely that not even atoms remain. The tomb mind, observing through the sensors of the remaining scarabs, registers the destruction with algorithmic detachment. Asset loss. Acceptable. Data gathered. Substantial. Threat level assessment. Elevated to priority beta 3. Elevated to. The surviving scarabs execute evasive maneuvers, their anti-gravitic engines pushing them to velocities that would tear apart organic creatures. They stream out of the chamber in all directions, following randomized escape vectors to prevent the Hellbrute from tracking and eliminating them systematically. Behind them, the corrupted war machine bellows, the sound a mixture of mechanical grinding and organic roaring that should not issue from any throat, mechanical or otherwise. The Hellbrute, in its madness, attempts to pursue. Its massive feet, each one weighing several tons, slam into the chamber's floor with force that sends vibrations through the entire section of the tomb. Ancient stone cracks under the impact. Support structures designed to last until the heat death of the universe groan under stresses they were never meant to endure. The Hellbrute crashes through the chamber's exit, its bulk barely fitting through corridors that were sized for Necron warriors, not for war machines that stand 3 times their height. The tomb mind observes this rampage through the sensors of scattered scarabs and fixed monitoring systems throughout the affected sections. The Hellbrute is causing damage, but more concerning is the effect its presence has on the tomb's systems. Wherever it moves, sensors begin to malfunction. The corruption is spreading, not through any physical contamination, but through simple proximity. The warp-touched nature of the Hellbrute is bleeding into reality, creating localized distortions that cause properly functioning equipment to suddenly report impossible readings, or simply cease operation altogether. This is something that cannot be ignored or contained through simple observation. The tomb mind escalates its response to priority beta 1 and initiates deployment of the next level of Canoptek constructs, the spiders. If scarabs are the maintenance crews of a Necron tomb, the Canoptek spiders are the shift supervisors and heavy repair units. They are massive constructs, each one the size of a small vehicle. Their bodies shaped roughly like those of terrestrial arachnids, though the resemblance is superficial. Multiple articulated limbs allow them to navigate complex 3-dimensional environments with ease, while their anti-gravitic engines provide additional mobility when needed. Unlike the scarabs, which possess only limited autonomy, spiders have genuine artificial intelligence, though still far below the level of a true consciousness. The spiders emerging from their maintenance bays have not moved in millions of years, yet they activate without any sign of stiffness or malfunction. Necron technology does not degrade. Time simply does not touch their systems in the way it affects the crude machines of younger races. They move through the tomb with purpose, their fabricator claw arrays flexing as internal diagnostics run through activation routines. Each spider is equipped with weapons as well as repair systems. Their fabricator arrays can serve as devastating close combat weapons, capable of tearing through armor with ease. Some mount particle beamers on their dorsal sections, directed energy weapons that can reduce infantry to clouds of superheated atoms. They are not warriors by design, but they are more than capable of eliminating threats that are too large or too dangerous for scarab swarms to handle alone. 3 spiders converge on the Hellbrute's location, approaching from different directions to prevent it from focusing on a single target. They move with eerie silence despite their mass, their anti-gravitic systems making them effectively weightless. The tomb mind coordinates their approach, linking their processing capabilities into a Gestalt mind, far more capable than any single spider could achieve alone. The Hellbrute has crashed through several corridors by this point, leaving a trail of damaged systems and destabilized structural members in its wake. It moves, with no apparent goal, simply lashing out at whatever it encounters. The madness that drives it makes no distinction between threats and architecture. It has fired its multi-melter at walls, crushed support pillars with its power fist, and bellowed its rage at the uncaring darkness of the tomb. When the first spider emerges from a side corridor ahead of the Hellbrute, the corrupted war machine does not hesitate. Its targeting system, such as it still functions, identifies the construct as a threat. The multi-melter swings up, its barrel glowing with building heat as the weapon prepares to fire. But the spider is not like the fragile scarabs. When the multi-melter discharges its devastating beam, the spider's living metal armor simply flows, dispersing the heat across its entire body, rather than allowing it to concentrate at a single point. The beam, which should have melted through the spider's core systems, instead leaves only surface scorching. Before the Hellbrute can fire again, the other two spiders attack from behind. One's particle beamer lances out, its directed energy designed to superheat matter until it undergoes explosive phase transition. The beam strikes the Hellbrute's back plating, and for the first time, the corrupted war machine registers something that might be pain, translated into mechanical terms. Armor plates deform. Corrupted flesh blisters and burns. The warp-touched nature of the Hellbrute's construction makes it resistant to conventional damage, but the particle beamer does not operate according to conventional principles. The Hellbrute spins with startling agility for something so massive. Its power fist swings in a wide arc, missing the attacking spider by mere centimeters. The corrupted machine's combat systems are degraded, but not destroyed, and some tactical awareness still functions beneath the layers of madness. It recognizes that it is surrounded, that the creatures attacking it are coordinating their assault. The battle that follows is a strange dance of ancient technology and corrupted machinery. The spiders work together with mechanical precision, their linked intelligence allowing them to anticipate and counter the Hellbrute's movements. When it turns to engage one, the others attack its flanks. When it tries to back into a corner to protect its rear arc, they herd it away from advantageous positions. The tomb mind observes through their sensors, gathering data on the intruder's capabilities and weaknesses. This coordination is something that no human force could replicate. Each spider processes information at rates measured in teraflops per second, analyzing the Hellbrute's movements and predicting its next action based on accumulated battle data spanning millions of years. When one spider identifies a weakness, a joint that moves more slowly than optimal, an armor plate that's thinner than the others, that information is instantly transmitted to its companions. The next attack targets that weakness specifically, probing and testing to determine if it can be exploited. This is warfare conducted at the speed of thought, decisions made and executed faster than any organic nervous system could process. The Hellbrute fights with the desperation of something that knows only violence and pain. Its every movement is fueled by hatred given mechanical form. When its multi-melter overheats from sustained fire, the weapon's thermal management systems failing under the strain of continuous use, the Hellbrute doesn't pause to let it cool. Instead, it uses the weapon as a club, swinging the massive gun at the spiders with enough force to dent their living metal frames. The multi-melter's cherry red from internal heat leaves scorched marks on any surface it contacts. When one particularly savage blow connects with a spider's carapace, the impact creates a sound like a massive bell being struck, the resonance traveling through the tomb's structure and registering on sensors hundreds of meters away. When one spider gets too close, attempting to use its fabricator claw arrays to tear into the Hellbrute's corrupted armor, the corrupted war machine seizes it with its power fist. The energy field around the fist disrupts the spider's structural integrity at the quantum level, breaking the molecular bonds that give living metal its characteristic resilience. For a moment, it seems the corrupted machine might tear the construct apart entirely. The spider's limbs begin to buckle, its carapace cracking as the power fist's energy field eats away at its atomic structure. But Necron technology is made of sterner stuff than that. Even as the Hellbrute's power fist crushes and tears, the spider's self-repair protocols activate with machine-like inevitability. Its living metal flows like mercury, reinforcing damaged sections even as they're being destroyed, creating new structural supports to replace those that fail. The metal seems almost intelligent in its response, flowing away from the most severe damage and concentrating in areas where it can best support the overall structure. Microscopic channels open within the spider's frame, redirecting power away from non-essential systems and flooding the damaged areas with raw energy that fuels the repair process. The other two spiders intensify their assault, recognizing that their companion is in immediate danger. Particle beams lance out with increased frequency, each one precisely targeted to maximize damage to the Hellbrute while minimizing risk to the trapped spider. They aim for joints, for weapon mounts, for any point where the corrupted machine's armor is thinner or more vulnerable. The beams score deep gouges into the Hellbrute's armor, metal vapor streaming away in glowing clouds as superheated material undergoes explosive phase transition. In some places, the beams burn all the way through, creating molten holes that expose the corrupted mechanisms beneath. The trapped spider wrenches itself free with a movement that appears almost violent in its desperation, though of course it feels no actual desperation or fear. It simply calculates that remaining in the Hellbrute's grip will result in catastrophic damage, and it executes the most efficient extraction maneuver available to it. The movement leaves behind portions of its limbs, entire articulated segments, torn away by the power fist's crushing force. But the spider is otherwise intact enough to continue fighting, its remaining limbs more than sufficient for combat operations. The torn segments, still energized by residual power, continue to twitch and flex where they fell, their autonomous systems not yet realizing they've been separated from the main body. The tomb mind registers a new development, one that represents a shift in tactical approach. The damaged spider begins to generate scarabs from its internal production systems, using energy harvested from the Hellbrute's own attacks to fuel the creation process. This is a capability that spiders possess but rarely need to use the ability to manufacture new canoptech units in the field, drawing on available energy and raw materials to create fresh assets mid-battle. The process is not instantaneous, but it's far faster than any organic reproduction could be. Dozens of fresh scarabs pour from the spider's fabrication organs, each one emerging fully formed and fully functional. They swarm over the Hellbrute's legs and lower body like a silver tide, chittering to each other in high-frequency data bursts as they coordinate their attack patterns. They begin to disassemble the corrupted machine with single-minded purpose, their molecular cutting beams working in concert to strip away armor plating one molecule at a time. Each scarab targets a different section, ensuring that the deconstruction proceeds evenly across the entire surface, rather than concentrating on individual points. The sensation is unlike anything the Hellbrute has experienced, even in its long existence of torment. This is not pain, in any conventional sense. It's the sensation of being unmade, of having the fundamental structure of one's existence dissolved from the outside in. The corrupted consciousness within the Hellbrute's sarcophagus, already fractured by centuries of madness, struggles to process what's happening. It tries to activate pain override protocols, only to discover that these systems cannot cope with the unique nature of molecular disassembly. It attempts to shut down sensory inputs, to retreat into the core of its awareness, where the assault cannot reach, but finds that the corruption binding it to the machine prevents such escape. The Hellbrute thrashes wildly, crushing scarabs by the dozens with each flailing movement. Its power fist sweeps through clouds of them, the energy field vaporizing any construct it contacts. Its feet stomp down with thunderous force, creating impact craters in the tomb's floor as they pulverize scarabs beneath many tons of corrupted metal. But for every scarab destroyed, the spiders generate two more. The mathematics of the engagement favor the Necrons absolutely. The Hellbrute's resources are finite. It has only so much power, only so much strength, only so much will to continue fighting. The canoptech units, by contrast, are drawing on the tomb's virtually limitless power reserves, and they possess no will that can be broken or exhausted. The spiders press their advantage with calculated precision, their coordinated assault driving the Hellbrute backward, step by step. The corrupted machine retreats not out of any tactical consideration, but simply because the assault is too intense to resist while standing in place. It takes one step back, then another, each movement bringing it closer to what the tomb mind has identified as an optimal engagement zone. The Hellbrute is being herded, manipulated with the same cold efficiency that a shepherd might use to guide livestock into a pen. The chamber into which the Hellbrute is being driven is vast beyond mortal comprehension. It was once a staging area for Necron warriors, a marshalling ground where entire legions would gather before being transported to the surface for deployment. The chamber stretches away in all directions, its walls lost in darkness so complete that even the Hellbrute's optical sensors struggle to define its boundaries. The floor is perfectly flat, unmarked by any imperfection despite having borne the weight of countless millions of Necron warriors over the course of the tomb's operation. The ceiling rises hundreds of meters overhead, supported by pillars that seem too slender for the weight they must bear, each one a marvel of engineering that makes Imperial architecture look like crude stone stacking by comparison. More importantly, for the tomb mind's purposes, the chamber is ringed with weapons emplacements, Gauss flare arrays that can be activated remotely if the threat level justifies such escalation. These arrays have been dormant for 60 million years, their targeting systems locked in standby mode, their power conduits carrying only the minimal current necessary to prevent total deactivation. But they are still functional, still capable of the devastating firepower they were designed to deliver. In microseconds, they could be brought to full operational status. The tomb mind makes its calculation, running probability models that take into account thousands of variables: the Hellbrute's combat effectiveness, the rate at which Canoptech assets are being depleted, the likelihood of the corruption spreading to other tomb sectors, the energy cost of activating defensive systems versus the energy cost of continuing the current engagement. The algorithm runs through multiple iterations, testing different scenarios and weighting them according to priority protocols established millions of years ago by Necron cryptechs, whose names and dynasties have long since been forgotten. The conclusion is unambiguous. The intruder has proven more dangerous than anticipated. Its corrupted nature is spreading instability throughout the affected sectors, sensor systems reporting anomalous readings that extend far beyond the Hellbrute's immediate location. Asset loss among Canoptech units, while not yet critical, is approaching levels that would require significant energy expenditure to replace. Most concerning of all, analysis of the corruption's spread rate suggests that if the Hellbrute is not eliminated soon, the contamination could systems that would be difficult or impossible to purge without awakening senior members of the tomb's nobility. It is time to demonstrate why the Necrons were the most feared power in the galaxy millions of years before the Imperium existed. It is time to show this corrupted remnant of a lesser race what happens when you violate the sanctity of a Necron tomb. The chamber's defensive systems come online with a precision that would be impossible for any system built by younger races. Power flows through circuits that have been dormant since before humanity evolved, following pathways etched into crystalline matrices by technologies that the Adeptus Mechanicus would classify as heretical xenotech at best, or impossible at worst. Flare arrays emerge from recessed emplacements in the chamber's walls, their weapon mounts tracking smoothly to acquire the Hellbrute's position. Targeting systems that predate human civilization lock onto the corrupted war machine with mathematical precision, calculating trajectories and firing solutions faster than the Hellbrute's own corrupted machine spirit can process the threat. And then, from a dozen different angles simultaneously, the Gauss flare arrays open fire. To understand the true horror of Necron Gauss weapons, one must first abandon conventional ideas about how energy weapons function. An Imperial Lascanon vaporizes its target through thermal energy, heating matter until it undergoes explosive phase transition. A plasma weapon envelops its target in superheated matter, burning through armor and flesh alike. These are crude but effective approaches to destroying enemies. Gauss weapons operate on an entirely different principle. They do not heat or burn or explode. Instead, they unweave the very bonds that hold matter together. A Gauss beam strips its target down to constituent atoms, disassembling complex structures into their most basic components. Molecules separate. Atoms are torn from their lattices. Even at the quantum level, the fundamental forces that bind matter together are disrupted and negated. The effect on the Hellbrute is immediate and catastrophic. The first volley of Gauss fire strikes its armor plating, and that armor simply begins to disappear. Not melting or burning, but actually ceasing to exist in its current form. Ceramite becomes its component elements, iron and carbon, and other materials, separating from their bound states and dissipating into the air as individual atoms. The corrupted flesh that has grown through and over the armor unravels at the molecular level. Cellular structures breaking down faster than any biological process could repair. The Hellbrute's corrupted machine spirit, what remains of its consciousness, cannot process what is happening. It has endured damage before, has felt pain beyond what any organic creature could survive. But this is different. This is not pain. This is erasure. It is being unmade, deleted from reality, one layer at a time. It attempts to return fire, its multi-melter swinging toward the nearest Gauss array. The weapon discharges, its devastating beam scoring across the chamber's wall. Blackstone, that miraculous material from which the tomb is constructed, absorbs the heat without deforming. The Gauss array, protected behind layers of the tomb's most resilient materials, continues firing without pause. More Gauss beams lance out, targeting the Hellbrute's weapon systems. The multi-melter begins to disintegrate, its barrel unraveling as molecules separate and disperse. The Power Fist's energy field flickers and dies as the generators that power it are stripped down to atoms. Within seconds, the Hellbrute's offensive capabilities are neutralized, its weapons reduced to their component elements. But the Tomb Mind is not satisfied with simple disarmament. The threat must be eliminated entirely, every trace of corruption purged from the tomb's sacred precincts. The Gauss arrays shift their aim, targeting the Hellbrute's central mass, the corrupted sarcophagus that contains whatever remains of the pilot's body and consciousness. This is where the warp-touched nature of the Hellbrute becomes most apparent. The sarcophagus resists the Gauss weapons in ways that normal matter cannot. The chaos corruption that has saturated its structure creates a kind of shield, warping reality around itself to deflect the molecular disassembly beams. For several seconds, the sarcophagus holds intact, while the rest of the Hellbrute's body is systematically destroyed. The Tomb Mind registers this anomaly and adjusts its tactics. If conventional Gauss fire cannot penetrate the warp-saturated core, then additional measures are required. The chamber's defensive systems include more than just Gauss flare arrays. There are also phase shifters, devices that can cause matter to slip partially out of normal space-time. When these activate, the Hellbrute finds itself existing partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's already unstable matter spreading across realities it was never meant to touch. This proves to be the final blow, the chaos corruption that has sustained the Hellbrute, that has allowed it to continue functioning despite grievous damage, requires a stable connection to the warp. When the phase shifters force it into multiple dimensions at once, that connection is disrupted. For a brief moment, the pilot's consciousness experiences something that might be clarity, freedom from the madness and pain that has defined its existence for centuries. Then the Gauss weapons complete their work, and both machine and pilot cease to exist in any meaningful form. The Tomb Mind observes the destruction with dispassionate satisfaction. Threat eliminated. Efficiency acceptable. Collateral damage within acceptable parameters. The Canoptech units can now begin the process of restoration and purification. The scarabs swarm back into the chamber, descending on the remains of the Hellbrute like mechanical vultures. But where scavengers would consume and leave waste, the scarabs consume and leave nothing. Every atom that composed the Hellbrute is broken down and absorbed, its energy stored in the scarab's internal matrices. Even the corrupted flesh is not spared. The scarab's molecular disassembly beams do not distinguish between metal and meat, between pure matter and chaos-tainted substance. Within minutes, no trace of the Hellbrute remains. The chamber floor is pristine, showing no sign that anything beyond ordinary maintenance scarabs have ever traversed its surface. The scarabs that absorb the Hellbrute's materials cluster together, their programming recognizing that the energy they carry is tainted. They move toward disposal systems deep within the tomb, where that energy will be discharged harmlessly into pre-prepared containment fields before being bled off into the planet's core. The spiders, meanwhile, have begun repairs on the damaged sections of the tomb. The corridor walls that the Hellbrute damaged during its rampage are restored, fresh living metal flowing from the spider's fabricator arrays to replace what was destroyed. Support structures are reinforced. Power conduits are rerouted around damaged sections until repairs can be completed. Within hours, the tomb will show no evidence that anything unusual occurred. But the tomb mind is not finished with its analysis. The encounter has raised questions that require resolution before the tomb can truly return to its dormant state. How did the intruder arrive? Are there others? Is this an isolated incident or the precursor to a larger threat? The data from the battle must be processed. Patterns must be identified. Probabilities must be calculated. The tomb mind reviews sensor logs from before the intrusion was detected. It searches for any anomalies, any indication of how a Chaos Dreadnought could have penetrated the tomb's defenses without triggering earlier warnings. The answer, when it emerges from the analysis, is disturbing. There is evidence of a warp intrusion approximately 73 years before the current date. A minor reality breach, lasting less than 3 milliseconds, occurred in Sector 7 Theta Prim. At the time, the tomb mind classified it as a false positive, a sensor glitch caused by cosmic radiation or other natural phenomena. But in retrospect, with the benefit of the data gathered from the Hellbrute encounter, the anomaly matches the signature of a warp teleportation event. The Hellbrute has been sitting dormant in that sector for 73 years, its power systems in standby mode, drawing just enough energy to maintain its corrupted pilot's barely living body. It might have remained there indefinitely, slowly degrading as its systems failed one by one, if the tomb mind had not sent scarabs to investigate the anomalous sensor readings. Only when the scarabs attempted to analyze it did it awaken and begin its rampage. This realization prompts a new directive from the tomb mind. If warp intrusions are possible within the tomb's lower levels, then monitoring protocols must be enhanced. New sensor arrays are commissioned, their specifications designed to detect even the briefest fluctuations in local reality. The Canoptech units are reprogrammed to investigate any spatial anomalies immediately, before potential threats can establish themselves. But the tomb mind's calculations go further. The presence of a Chaos Dreadnought, even one, suggests that the galaxy beyond the tomb has changed during the millions of years of the Great Sleep. When the Necrons entered their slumber, the warp was a known quantity, a realm to be avoided and guarded against, but not a source of physical intrusions into secured facilities. The fact that reality itself can now be breached by creatures from the Immaterium indicates a fundamental shift in the cosmic balance. This concerns the tomb mind enough to consider escalating the matter to higher authority. Perhaps it is time to awaken one of the lesser nobles, a Necron Lord who can make strategic decisions beyond the tomb mind's programmed parameters. But such a decision is not to be made lightly. Each awakening drains energy from the tomb's reserves, energy that may be needed in the future. The tomb mind runs probability models, calculating the likelihood of further intrusions against the cost of premature awakening. The conclusion is clear. One intrusion does not constitute a pattern. The statistical likelihood of another Chaos Dreadnought appearing within the tomb is vanishingly small. The enhanced monitoring protocols should be sufficient to detect and eliminate any future threats before they pose significant danger. Awakening a noble would be an inefficient use of resources. The matter is logged for future reference, but does not warrant immediate escalation. and so the tomb returns to its dormant state. Power systems cycle down to minimal levels, their energy outputs reducing to barely detectable levels as they transition from combat readiness to long-term maintenance mode. Canoptech units return to their maintenance bays to await the next call to service, their internal systems running diagnostic routines to identify any damage sustained during the encounter. The scarabs settle back into their patient patrols, chittering softly to each other as they monitor systems that have functioned flawlessly for millions of years. Their databanks now contain complete specifications for Chaos Dreadnoughts, detailed analysis of warp corruption patterns, and optimized response protocols for future encounters with similar threats. This information will be invaluable when the tomb fully awakens. The tomb mind retreats into its low-power mode, maintaining only those processes necessary for basic monitoring and threat detection. But even in this reduced state, it continues to process the data from the encounter, running simulations and refining protocols. The battle lasted less than an hour from initial scarab contact to final purge completion. But the tomb mind has extracted thousands of data points from that brief engagement. It now knows how warp corruption affects structural integrity under Gauss fire. It knows how corrupted flesh responds to molecular disassembly. It knows the thermal signatures of demonic entities and the sensor profiles of reality distortions. All this knowledge has been catalogued, cross-referenced, and integrated into the tomb's defensive matrices. Silence reclaims the tomb. The ancient halls stand empty once more, their black stone walls bearing witness to no movement, save the occasional passage of a scarab on its rounds. The stasis chambers continue their eternal function, preserving the nobles within in perfect suspension, waiting for the day when they will be called upon to reclaim the galaxy that was once theirs by right. Inside those chambers, Necron lords and overlords sleep on, unaware that their tomb was violated, unaware that an enemy penetrated their defenses, unaware that the systems they built millions of years ago functioned exactly as designed to eliminate the threat. But the encounter has not been without consequence. Deep in the tomb mind's data repositories, new protocols have been established, new subroutines written into the fundamental code that governs the tomb's responses. The next time a warp-touched entity dares to intrude upon a Necron tomb, the response will be immediate and overwhelming. There will be no investigation period, no attempt to analyze before destroying. Anything bearing the taint of chaos will be eliminated on sight, with maximum force and zero hesitation. The protocols are clear: detect, classify, destroy, purge. No exceptions, no delays, no mercy. This is the cold logic of Necron efficiency. They do not hate as organic creatures hate. They do not fear or rage or despair. But they do adapt, and they do learn with a precision that organic life forms cannot match. The encounter with the Hellbrute has taught the tomb mind something valuable: that the galaxy has spawned new threats during the long sleep, threats that combine technological sophistication with immaterial corruption in ways that are uniquely dangerous. These threats require specific countermeasures, and those countermeasures have now been developed, tested, and proven effective. The implications of this encounter extend beyond a single tomb world. Throughout the galaxy, on thousands of planets where Necron tombs lie buried beneath the surface, similar awakening processes are occurring. The Great Sleep was never meant to last forever. The Necrons are stirring, their long dormancy coming to an end as the time of awakening approaches. As more tombs come online, more tomb minds begin their analysis of the current galactic situation, and they discover a universe that has changed dramatically since they entered stasis. When the Necrons went to sleep, the galaxy was empty. The old ones were dead, destroyed, in the war in heaven. The Enslaver Plague had run its course, consuming the psychic races that had once served as the old ones' pawns. The Aeldari were primitives, barely beginning to build the civilization that would one day span the galaxy. The Krork, those brutal green-skinned warriors who would eventually devolve into the Orcs, were scattered and leaderless. There were no humans, no Tyranids, no Tau. The galaxy was a blank slate, waiting for new civilizations to arise and claim it. Now, 60 million years later, the galaxy teems with life. The Imperium of Man sprawls across 1,000,000 worlds, its armies counting their numbers in the billions. The Orcs rampage through entire sectors, their endless appetite for violence creating conflict wherever they go. The Tyranid hive fleets approach from beyond the galactic rim, consuming everything in their path. And most disturbingly, chaos has grown from a theoretical danger into an active threat, with entire regions of space now saturated with warp energies that make them uninhabitable by any rational form of life. This is the galaxy the Necrons are waking to discover. It is not the peaceful, empty realm they expected to inherit. Instead, it is a war zone on a scale that dwarfs even the war in heaven. Every faction fights every other faction. Alliances form and dissolve within generations. Ancient grudges spawn new conflicts. The materiel cost of the ongoing wars is astronomical, with entire planets reduced to lifeless slag in pursuit of tactical advantages that may last mere decades. And when they pool their data, when the Necron leadership begins to assess the state of the galaxy, they will discover what the Tomb Mind in this story has learned, that chaos has become a significant power during their absence. The warp has breached into reality in ways that were never possible during the war in heaven. Entire regions of space are now saturated with immaterial energies. Daemons walk on mortal worlds. Corruption spreads through civilizations like a plague. This represents a fundamental problem for the Necrons' long-term plans. They did not sleep for 60 million years merely to rest. They slept because the galaxy needed time to heal from the war in heaven, time for new life to arise that could be harvested for biotransference experiments. The Necrons' ultimate goal is to reverse their transformation, to reclaim the flesh and blood bodies they traded away in their pact with the Cetan. But that requires living subjects whose biology can be studied and replicated, whose souls can be examined and understood. Chaos threatens this goal directly. A galaxy consumed by warp corruption is useless to the Necrons. They cannot study souls that have been claimed by the Dark Gods. They cannot harvest genetic material from populations that have been twisted by mutation into barely functional monstrosities. They need order, stability, a cosmos where the laws of physics apply consistently and predictably. Chaos represents the antithesis of everything they require. This is a development that the Necrons cannot and will not tolerate. They fought a war against the Old Ones and their creations, a war that lasted millions of years and reshaped the galaxy. They shattered their enemies and ground their allies into dust. They achieved victory through ruthless application of superior technology and absolute willingness to pay any price for success. And now, they find that their victory has been undermined by the very forces they despise most, the creatures of the warp. The Necrons' hatred of the warp is fundamental to their existence. It runs deeper than simple opposition or strategic rivalry. The warp represents everything the Necrons are not: chaos versus order, emotion versus logic, the mutable versus the immutable. When the Necrontyr made their pact with the Cetan and underwent biotransference, they did not merely trade flesh for living metal. They severed their connection to the warp entirely, rendering themselves immune to psychic powers and invisible to entities that perceive reality through immaterial senses. This was not an accident or an unfortunate side effect. It was one of the primary advantages that biotransference offered, perhaps even the primary advantage. The Old Ones and their servant races relied heavily on psychic powers, on manipulation of the warp to achieve effects that no physical science could replicate. They could peer across vast distances through the immaterium, coordinate their forces telepathically, and strike at their enemies with powers that bypassed conventional defenses. Against conventional armies, these abilities were devastating. By removing themselves from the warp entirely, the Necrons gained a tremendous tactical advantage. Psychic attacks had no effect on them. You cannot assault the mind of a being that has no mind in the conventional sense. Daemons could not perceive them. Entities that see through the warp found only emptiness where Necron warriors stood. The weapons that had proven most effective against the Necrontyr during the early stages of the war in heaven were suddenly useless. It was as if the Necrons had stepped outside reality itself, becoming ghosts that existed in the physical world but remained invisible to the spiritual. But that advantage came with a terrible price. one that the Necrontyr only fully understood after biotransference was complete and irreversible. They traded their souls for immortality and power. They became locked into their metal forms, unable to grow or change or feel as they once had. The nobility retained their personalities and intellects, but they found that their emotional range had been severely curtailed. They could still experience anger and pride, ambition and satisfaction, but the subtler emotions, love, compassion, true joy, were beyond their reach. And the rank and file became little more than automatons, capable of following orders, but possessing no true will of their own. Their consciousness reduced to dim sparks that flickered within mechanical shells. This was deemed an acceptable trade-off at the time. The Necrontyr were desperate, their civilization on the brink of collapse, their bodies ravaged by radiation from their own sun. They would have accepted almost any price for survival. And in terms of pure military effectiveness, biotransference was an overwhelming success. The Necron legions were invincible, sweeping across the galaxy and crushing all opposition. The old ones fell. Their servant races were scattered. Victory seemed complete. Now, millions of years later, the Necrons find themselves facing a galaxy where the warp has grown stronger rather than weaker. The forces they thought they had rendered irrelevant have returned, perhaps even more powerful than before. The immaterial realm that should have withered without the old ones to feed it has instead expanded, gorged on the emotions of the countless trillions of sentient beings that now populate the galaxy. This is both a challenge and an opportunity. A challenge because warp-based threats require different strategies than conventional warfare, and an opportunity because the Necrons possess technology specifically designed to counter and nullify the warp's influence. Consider the Cadian pylons, those massive structures that stood on the fortress world of Cadia for tens of thousands of years before their destruction during Abaddon, the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade. These were Necron technology, ancient devices designed to stabilize reality and prevent the warp from bleeding through into normal space. They functioned by projecting null fields, zones where the barrier between reality and the immaterium was reinforced to such a degree that psychic powers could not function and daemons could not manifest. Their presence was the primary reason why the Eye of Terror, that massive warp storm that has plagued the Imperium for 10 millennia, could not expand beyond its current boundaries. When Abaddon destroyed the pylons, he broke the chains that held back the warp. The result was the Great Rift, a galaxy-spanning wound in reality that split the Imperium in half and plunged entire sectors into nightmare. Worlds that had known stability for thousands of years suddenly found themselves in regions where reality itself was negotiable, where the laws of physics applied only intermittently, where demons manifested without summoning, and the dead rose from their graves animated by warp energies. But what Abaddon may not have realized, what very few beings in the galaxy understand, is that those pylons were just one network among many. Throughout the galaxy, on worlds that have been lost and forgotten, other pylon networks sleep beneath the surface, waiting for the Necrons to reactivate them. Some of these networks are even more powerful than the Cadian system, capable of projecting null fields across entire star systems rather than just planetary surfaces. If the Necrons can restore even a fraction of these networks to full operation, they could seal away the warp permanently, restoring reality to its proper order. This is the Necrons' answer to chaos. Not faith, or heroic sacrifice, or individual courage, but cold technology applied with mathematical precision. They have the means to seal the warp away, to restore reality to its proper order, to create a galaxy where physical laws apply consistently, and the nightmares of the Immaterium cannot intrude. They need only the power and the time to deploy their systems on a galactic scale. Every tomb world that awakens, every dynasty that begins its restoration, brings them closer to that goal. But achieving that goal requires dealing with immediate threats first, and that means confronting chaos forces wherever they appear. The encounter between the tomb and the Hellbrute is but one example of countless such interactions happening throughout the galaxy. Chaos forces stumble across Necron tombs, sometimes through deliberate exploration, sometimes through the random chance of warp storms or miscalculated teleportations. Sometimes they retreat before the sleeping guardians can fully awaken. Sometimes they press their attack, hoping to claim ancient technology or simply to destroy what they do not understand. Always, they underestimate their enemy. The truth that Chaos fails to recognize the fundamental mistake that underlies every Chaos incursion into Necron territory is that the Necrons are fundamentally immune to the very corruption that makes Chaos forces so dangerous to other races. Daemons cannot possess beings that have no souls. Warp energies cannot corrupt machines that exist entirely outside the immaterium. The psychological warfare that breaks the spirits of Imperial defenders, that turns proud warriors into gibbering wrecks, has no effect on entities that no longer feel fear or doubt or despair. This is not to say that Necrons are invulnerable to chaos. Their physical forms can still be damaged by conventional means, and Chaos forces certainly possess such means in abundance. Demons may not be able to corrupt a Necron warrior, but they can still tear it apart with their claws or incinerate it with warp fire. Chaos Space Marines may not be able to break a Necron's will, but their weapons are more than capable of shattering its body. The advantage the Necrons possess is strategic rather than tactical. In any individual engagement, the outcome depends on force disposition, terrain, leadership, and 1,000 other factors. But across the span of a long campaign, the inability of Chaos to corrupt or subvert Necron forces becomes decisive. There are no traitors among the Necrons, no weak-willed individuals who can be turned against their comrades. There are no souls to be offered to the dark gods in exchange for power. The Necrons fight with perfect cohesion, every warrior executing its assigned role without hesitation or deviation. This was demonstrated dramatically during the Cerberax Wars, a series of conflicts that erupted in the Ultima Segmentum after the opening of the Great Rift. A massive warp storm, designated Cerberax by Imperial observers, threatened to consume several star systems, but one of those systems contained the Ymga monolith, an ancient Necron construct of immense power. When the storm approached the monolith, something unexpected occurred. The monolith activated, creating a perfect sphere of ordered reality around itself that the warp storm could not penetrate. This drew the attention of Khorne, the blood god, who dispatched legions of his daemons to destroy the monolith and allow the storm to continue its expansion. The resulting conflict lasted for solar months and claimed billions of lives as Khornate demons battled against the Necrons of the Sotek dynasty. The Necrons did not emerge victorious in any conventional sense. They could not destroy the daemons permanently, for such entities simply reform in the warp when their material bodies are destroyed. But neither could the daemons overcome the Necrons' defenses or destroy the monolith. The stalemate demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of Necron resistance to chaos. On the positive side, the Necrons proved utterly immune to the rage-inducing aura that Khorne's daemons generate, an effect that normally causes even Space Marines to throw aside tactics in favor of mindless melee combat. Necron warriors continued to execute their assigned firing patterns with perfect precision, even as bloodletters charged directly into their ranks. The demon's reality-warping powers had minimal effect on Necron equipment, which is designed to function regardless of local conditions. On the negative side, the Necrons found it difficult to achieve decisive victory. Daemons that were destroyed simply returned to the warp, reforming and attacking again. The Necrons could hold their ground indefinitely, but they could not push forward and eliminate the threat at its source. This is a fundamental limitation when fighting warp-based enemies. You cannot truly kill something that was never truly alive in the conventional sense. The solution, from the Necron perspective, lies in the use of their anti-warp technology. The monolith itself demonstrated this principle by creating a zone where warp energies could not function normally. If such technology could be deployed on a larger scale, if networks of anti-warp devices could be established across the galaxy, then the chaos threat could be neutralized, not through direct combat, but through systematic denial of the environment it requires to exist. This is why encounters like the one between the Tomb and the Hellbrute are significant beyond their immediate tactical implications. Each such encounter provides data, confirms theories, identifies vulnerabilities. The Tomb mind that eliminated the Hellbrute learned valuable lessons about how warp-touched entities respond to Gauss weapons, about the effectiveness of phase shifters against demonic corruption, about the proper protocols for detecting and eliminating such threats before they can establish themselves. And that data will be shared. When this tomb world fully awakens, when its nobles take command and begin communicating with other dynasties, the lessons learned from this encounter will spread throughout the Necron Empire. Other tomb minds will update their protocols. Other canoptech systems will be reprogrammed to recognize and respond to chaos incursions more efficiently. The next Hellbrute that dares to intrude upon a Necron tomb will find itself facing defenses that have been specifically calibrated to counter its every capability. This is how the Necrons operate. They do not learn through experience and adapt through trial and error in the way that organic species do. Instead, they gather data, analyze patterns, and implement systematic improvements across their entire civilization. A lesson learned by one tomb benefits every tomb. A tactical innovation developed by one cryptech can be transmitted to every other cryptech in the dynasty within minutes. They are not individuals learning and growing, but nodes in a vast network, each contributing to a collective understanding that grows exponentially with each new data point. From the perspective of chaos, this makes the Necrons the most dangerous enemy they face. The Imperium can be corrupted, its citizens turned against each other, its heroes tempted into damnation. The Eldar can be manipulated, their pride and obsessions exploited for the amusement of the dark gods. Even the Orcs, with their simple nature, can be turned toward useful purposes by clever application of psychology and circumstance. But the Necrons, they are a wall against which chaos crashes and breaks, an enemy that cannot be turned, cannot be corrupted, cannot be made to serve any purpose but their own. This is perhaps why encounters between Necrons and Chaos forces are relatively rare. The Necrons, for their part, have no interest in Chaos territory or resources. They do not seek to conquer the Eye of Terror or to claim demon worlds as their own. Such places are anathema to their nature, regions of space where their technology functions poorly if at all. They are content to maintain the boundaries between reality and the warp, preventing incursions rather than pursuing offensive campaigns into Chaos-held space. Chaos, meanwhile, finds little to gain from attacking Necron holdings. There are no souls to harvest from the Necrons, no mortals to corrupt, no glory to be won in battle against foes that feel no fear or rage. A Chaos champion who defeats a Necron army gains no favor from the Dark Gods, for the victory was achieved through simple application of force, rather than through any expression of emotion or will that would please those entities. The Necrons are, in a sense, beneath Chaos's notice, too mechanical and sterile to be worth the effort of systematic destruction. Yet conflicts still occur, as the encounter in this story demonstrates. Sometimes they are accidental, the result of warp storms or teleportation mishaps. Sometimes they are deliberate, when Chaos forces seek to claim Necron technology, or when their expansion brings them into contact with awakening tomb worlds. Whatever the cause, the pattern is always similar. Initial contact, escalation, systematic elimination of the Chaos threat through superior firepower and complete immunity to corruption. The story of the Hellbrute in the tomb is thus a microcosm of the larger conflict between these two forces. On one side, the corrupting madness of Chaos, individual power and emotion taken to their logical and horrifying extreme. On the other, the cold perfection of Necron order, logic and technology stripped of all sentiment or mercy. When they meet, there is no possibility of compromise or coexistence. One must prevail, and the other must be destroyed. In this case, as in so many others, the Necrons prevailed. The Hellbrute was eliminated, its corruption purged, all trace of its presence removed from the tomb. The victory was achieved not through heroism or sacrifice, but through simple application of appropriate force. The tomb mind identified the threat, deployed sufficient assets to neutralize it, and then returned to its normal functions without fanfare or celebration. This is how the Necrons wage war, efficiently, systematically, and without emotion. But the encounter raises questions that extend beyond this single tomb world. How many other chaos intrusions have occurred on other tomb worlds? How many hellbrutes, corrupted war machines, and demon-possessed artifacts are sitting dormant in chambers that have not been investigated in millions of years? And what will happen when the Necrons complete their awakening? When the full might of their empire is brought to bear against the forces of chaos? These are questions that the galaxy will answer in time. For now, one tomb has dealt with one intruder, and the ancient halls once again stand silent and watchful. The Necrons sleep on, their dreams, if such beings can be said to dream, untouched by the corruption that stalks the galaxy above. And when they wake, when the time of awakening finally comes, they will remember this encounter and all others like it. They will remember, and they will respond, not with anger or hatred, but with cold calculation. The Necrons have no love for the galaxy they once ruled, no affection for the lesser races that now scurry across worlds that were ancient when humanity was young. But they have standards, and one of those standards is that reality itself shall not be corrupted by the energies of the immaterium. Where the warp intrudes, the Necrons will push it back. Where chaos establishes itself, the Necrons will purge it. Not for the sake of the galaxy's inhabitants, but for the sake of order itself, for the principle that reality should function according to predictable physical laws rather than the whims of malevolent entities from beyond. This is the legacy of the Necron tier, transformed into deathless machines and sleeping away the ages. They are the oldest guardians of order in a galaxy that has forgotten they existed. They are the answer to questions that younger races do not yet know to ask. And as they continue to awaken, as tomb after tomb comes back to life, and dynasty after dynasty begins its restoration, the galaxy will learn to fear them, not for their cruelty or their malice, but for their relentless, implacable efficiency. The Hellbrute's intrusion into the tomb was a minor incident, a footnote in the vast chronicle of the Necrons' history. It will not be recorded in any human document or remembered by any Imperial historian. The Chaos forces who lost that particular war machine will never know its fate, will never learn that it was systematically disassembled by silver scarabs in a chamber that predates their entire civilization. But the tomb mind will remember. The data will be preserved, filed away in crystalline matrices that will endure until the stars themselves grow cold. And that data, combined with data from countless other encounters across thousands of tomb worlds, will shape the Necron strategy as they reclaim what was once theirs. They will not make the mistakes they made during the war in heaven. They will not underestimate their enemies or assume that victory is assured by technological superiority alone. They will adapt, evolve their tactics, develop new weapons and new strategies specifically calibrated to counter the threats they face. The galaxy that the Necrons are awakening to is not the galaxy they remember. The old ones are long dead. The enslavers have retreated to whatever hell spawned them. But in their place have come new threats. The Imperium with its vast armies and fanatical faith, the Tyranids consuming everything in their path, and most troubling of all, chaos spreading its corruption through every corner of civilized space. These are challenges that will test even the Necrons' formidable capabilities. But if there is one lesson to be drawn from the encounter between the tomb and the Hellbrute, it is this. The Necrons are not merely survivors of a bygone age. They are not relics to be studied or curiosities to be feared. They are the most technologically advanced civilization the galaxy has ever produced, and they have awakened to reclaim their rightful place as the dominant power in the universe. They do not negotiate. They do not compromise. They do not feel pity or remorse or fear. They are the Necrons, the undying, and they have begun to stir from their long slumber. The galaxy will learn to fear that awakening, to dread the moment when the tomb worlds rise and the ancient legions march once more beneath alien stars. And when that day comes, when the full might of the Necron Empire is finally unleashed, those who have dared to disturb their rest will learn what it means to face a foe that is older than their gods, more patient than their saints, and infinitely more ruthless than any mortal enemy could ever be. The tomb stands silent once more. The corridors are empty. The scarabs patrol their ancient rounds, and the spiders rest in their bays, awaiting the next call to service. But beneath that silence, Power builds. Systems activate. Protocols update. The tomb mind calculates and plans and prepares for the day when silence will give way to action, when dormancy will transform into awakening, and when the Necrons will once more stride forth to impose their will upon a galaxy that has forgotten what it means to truly fear. That day approaches. The Hellbrute's intrusion was but a harbinger, a sign of the conflicts to come. As more tombs awaken, as more Necrons rejoin the living world, encounters between the undying and the forces of chaos will multiply. Battles will be fought in the depths of tomb worlds and on the surfaces of demon worlds. Necron technology will be tested against demonic power, living metal against corrupted flesh, cold logic against burning madness. And in each such encounter, the outcome will be the same. The Necrons will prevail, not because they are stronger, though they often are, not because they are more numerous, though their armies are vast beyond counting, but because they are what they have always been, the perfect synthesis of order and technology, of logic and power. They are the answer to the question of what happens when a civilization perfects itself and then refuses to die. They are inevitable. They are eternal. They are the Necrons, and they are awakening. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the horrifying encounter between ancient Xenos technology and corrupted Imperial machinery, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We explore the darkest corners of Warhammer 40,000 lore, bringing you stories of epic battles, impossible encounters, and the terrifying realities of life in the 41st millennium. There's so much more to discover in this universe, from the glory of the Imperium to the horrors that lurk in the depths of space. Join us on this journey through the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, and where every story reveals another layer of the universe's rich and brutal history. The tomb awaits, the Necrons stir, and the galaxy will never be the same. In the grim darkness of the far future, where humanity wages endless war against the horrors that lurk between the stars, there exists perhaps no greater heresy than the union of human and Xenos. The Imperium of Man teaches from birth that alien life is an abomination, a stain upon the galaxy that must be scoured clean with bolter and flame. Yet in the infinite vastness of space, in the forgotten corners where imperial authority grows thin and desperate choices must be made, sometimes the impossible happens. Sometimes a child of the Tau Empire finds itself cradled in human hands, raised among the very species that would see its kind exterminated. This is the story of what that existence would be like, a tale of two worlds that should never meet, of identities that can never fully form, and of belonging that remains forever out of reach. To understand the profound alienation such a being would experience, we must first comprehend the fundamental nature of what the Tau are, and what humanity has become in this age of endless darkness. These are not simply two different cultures meeting across the void. These are species whose very biology, whose neural architecture and sensory experience of reality itself differ in ways both subtle and profound. The Tau evolved on a world different from Terra, shaped by different evolutionary pressures, their bodies and minds tuned to frequencies that humanity can barely comprehend. And humanity, oh humanity, has descended into such depths of xenophobia and religious fanaticism that the mere existence of alien life is considered an offense against the God Emperor himself. Imagine, if you will, being born into a body that feels wrong from the first moment of consciousness. Imagine opening eyes that perceive light in spectrums your caregivers cannot see, reaching out with hands that have too few digits, standing on legs that bend in ways that draw stares and whispers. Imagine a mind wired for collectivism, for the greater good, trapped in a society that glorifies individual sacrifice to an uncaring God. Imagine the hunger for connection to your own kind, a hunger that grows with each passing year, knowing that to admit what you are would mean death not just for yourself, but likely for everyone who dared to shelter you. This is the existence we explore today. Not a tale of heroism or glory, but something far more intimate and terrible. The day-to-day reality of being fundamentally other in a universe that offers no mercy to those who are different. The sensory experience of inhabiting a body that marks you as alien in 10,000 subtle ways. The psychological weight of living a lie so complete that even you begin to forget which parts are performance and which might be genuine. The crushing isolation of being utterly, irredeemably alone, surrounded by people yet forever separated by the unbridgeable gulf of species. We will walk through every stage of this impossible life, from the first confused moments of infantile awareness to the inevitable moment when the truth can no longer be hidden. We will explore the physical sensations that never quite feel right, the ideological contradictions that tear at the developing mind, the social dynamics that leave such a being perpetually on the outside looking in. And through it all, we will see how the very thing that makes the Tao who they are, their drive toward collective action and societal harmony, becomes a curse when experienced in isolation, without others of your kind to complete the circuit of understanding. The Imperium would tell you that such a scenario is impossible, that their zealous protection of humanity's purity would prevent any Xenos child from surviving long enough to be raised by human hands. The Tao would tell you that no child of the greater good could be so cruelly separated from the unity that defines their existence. But the galaxy is vast beyond comprehension, and in its darkest corners, the impossible becomes merely unlikely. And in a universe where billions die every day in conflicts that span solar systems, where entire worlds can be forgotten by the bureaucracy that nominally governs them, where desperate survivors will do desperate things, sometimes a blue-skinned infant with too few fingers ends up in human care. Perhaps it was found in the wreckage of a Tau diplomatic vessel, the only survivor of a warp transit gone catastrophically wrong. Perhaps it was left behind during a hasty evacuation, abandoned when Tau forces withdrew from a contested world rather than risk its capture. Perhaps some smuggler thought a Tau infant might fetch a price from collectors of exotic specimens, only to have the deal fall through, leaving them with a living, breathing liability. Perhaps a human family, far from imperial authority on some forgotten frontier world, found themselves moved by compassion when they discovered a crying child amid the ruins of battle, the fact that it had bluish skin seeming less important than the fact that it was alive and alone. However it happened, the result is the same. A Tau child, cut off from everything that would make it Tau, forced to navigate a human world with an alien's biology and psychology, forced to become something that neither species has a name for, something that exists in the spaces between, belonging nowhere and to no one. This is their story, the story of an impossible existence in an unforgiving galaxy, the nature of the Tau. Before we can truly understand what it means to be a Tau raised by humans, we must first comprehend what the Tau are in their natural state. They are, by galactic standards, remarkably young as a species. While humanity has spread across the stars for tens of thousands of years, and ancient races like the Eldari measure their existence in millions of years, the Tau have only recently developed interstellar travel. 6,000 years ago, when an explorator fleet from the Adeptus Mechanicus first discovered their homeworld, the Tau were still a primitive species, barely beginning to work metal and build permanent settlements. What happened next remains one of the great mysteries of the galaxy. The Mechanicus fleet marked the Tau world for later exploitation and moved on. When they returned, mere centuries later, they found not primitives, but a unified, technologically advanced civilization already reaching for the stars. The Tau had progressed through millennia of development, in a fraction of the time it took humanity. Some whisper of outside intervention, of hands unseen guiding their evolution. Others point to the sudden appearance of the ethereals, the mysterious caste that united warring Tau factions and set them on the path of the greater good. But whatever the cause, the Tau went from stone tools to plasma rifles with a speed that defies natural development. Physically, the Tau are humanoid in the broad sense, possessing 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head arranged in familiar configuration. But the similarities end there. A Tau stands shorter than the average human, their frame more slender and gracile, with less muscle mass distributed across a lighter skeletal structure. Their homeworld's gravity is slightly lower than Terra's, and this is reflected in their physiology. Where a human might break through a wooden door with brute force, a Tao would need to find another way, relying on tools or tactics rather than physical might. Their skin ranges from grey-blue to a deeper slate color, rough in texture compared to human skin, almost like fine suede to the touch. It serves them well in the arid plains and mountain ranges where their ancestors evolved, providing protection from the harsh sunlight of their homeworld. Their faces are broad and flat, dominated by large eyes positioned more to the sides of the head than a human's forward-facing gaze. These eyes see differently than human eyes. Their pupils, unable to dilate and contract as ours do, giving them poorer depth perception, in exchange for a visual spectrum that extends further into the ultraviolet and infrared wavelengths. They perceive colors we cannot name, see heat signatures we cannot detect without technology, but struggle with the precise distance judgment that humans take for granted. Most distinctively, Tao possess only 4 digits on each hand, 3 fingers, and an opposable thumb, and their feet are not feet at all in the human sense but hooves, solid and ungulate-like. They move with a different gait than humans. Their center of balance shifted, their stride adapted to terrain that humans would find alien. A human watching a Tao walk might describe the movement as slightly odd. Not quite wrong, but not quite right either. A subtle, uncanny quality that marks them as other even at a distance. Their olfactory organs are located inside the mouth rather than on a protruding nose, giving their face that characteristic flat appearance. This arrangement means they experience scent differently, taste and smell more intermingled than they are for humans. The slit that runs down the center of their face from forehead to where a nose would be differs between males and females. Males have a simple vertical eye shape, while females possess a Y-shaped slit. To human eyes, the differences are subtle, and many imperial observers have reported difficulty distinguishing Tao sexes without close examination. But the physical differences, significant as they are, pale in comparison to the gulf that exists in the way Tao perceive and interact with their reality on a fundamental cognitive level. Tao possess virtually no presence in the warp, that roiling sea of psychic energy that underlies reality itself. They cannot become psychers, cannot touch the powers that human witches wield. This makes them almost invisible to the predations of chaos, protected by their very lack of connection to that realm. But it also means they cannot travel through the warp, as humanity does. Their faster-than-light travel requires different technology, skimming along the edge of that realm, rather than diving into its depths. More importantly, the Tao mind itself operates on principles that seem alien to human psychology. They are shorter-lived than humans, with lifespans measuring around 40 standard years, though some sources suggest this might be longer for the ethereal caste. This compressed lifespan means they mature faster, reaching adulthood in their mid-teens rather than early 20s. But it also means they live with an urgency humans rarely match, a drive to accomplish and progress that pushes their society forward at a breakneck pace. From birth, a Tao's place in society is determined by the caste into which they are born. The fire caste, warriors and soldiers, tend to be the most physically robust, though still slighter than human military personnel. The earth caste, engineers and builders, are stockier and more practical in disposition. The water caste, diplomats and administrators, are taller and more graceful, their features softer and more expressive. The air caste, pilots and voidborn, are the tallest and most slender, their bodies adapted to low-gravity environments, their bones hollow and fragile by human standards. And the ethereals, the mysterious leaders who guide all Tao society, possess a distinctive diamond-shaped ridge of bone in their foreheads and command an authority that borders on the supernatural. Each caste is not merely a social role but a distinct subspecies, shaped by generations of specialized breeding and adaptation. A fire caste warrior cannot become an earth caste engineer, not merely because it is forbidden, but because they lack the physiological adaptations that make such work natural. The castes are designed to work together, each fulfilling roles that complement the others, creating a society that functions like a well-oiled machine. This brings us to the philosophical and psychological core of what makes the Tao who they are. The greater good, or Taowa in their language, is not merely a political ideology or a philosophical stance. It is the fundamental organizing principle of their entire civilization, so deeply ingrained that it shapes how they perceive reality itself. The greater good teaches that the needs of the collective outweigh the desires of the individual, that every Tao has a place in society, and society has a responsibility to every Tao, that all sentient beings would benefit from embracing this harmony. To human ears, particularly those steeped in the individualistic dogma of the imperial creed, this might sound like simple collectivism or communism, but the greater good goes deeper than mere political organization. It represents a fundamental way of perceiving one's place in the universe. A Tao does not see themselves as a lone individual struggling for survival and glory, but as one note in a greater symphony, one cell in a larger organism. Their identity is bound up with their role in society, their purpose defined by how they serve the whole. This collectivist psychology means that isolation is fundamentally traumatic for a Tao in ways that might not be immediately obvious to humans. Humans can be loners, hermits, individuals who thrive in solitude, but for a Tao, being cut off from their kind, from the network of reciprocal obligation and shared purpose that defines their existence, creates a psychological wound that never fully heals. They are social creatures not by preference but by the very architecture of their cognition. The Tao also possess what might be called a more literal and pragmatic worldview than many humans. They are not a particularly religious species, at least not in the way humans understand religion. They do not have gods they worship or supernatural forces they propitiate. The greater good is not a deity but an ideal, a goal toward which all effort is directed. This makes them oddly vulnerable to the religious fanaticism they encounter in other species, unable to fully comprehend the power that faith can wield over the human mind. Their approach to warfare reflects this practical mindset. They prefer ranged combat, using advanced technology to eliminate threats from a distance. The idea of charging into melee with chainswords roaring seems to them wasteful and inefficient. Why risk your life in close combat when a well-placed pulse rifle round can eliminate an enemy from half a kilometer away? Why glory in personal combat prowess when coordinated fire from a squad can achieve better results? This practicality extends to all aspects of their civilization. They value what works, what advances the greater good, rather than what honors ancient tradition or pleases supernatural entities. When humans join the Tao Empire, becoming Guevesa or human helpers, they are welcomed into this system, but can never truly become Tao. They cannot join the castes, cannot access the deepest levels of Tao society. They are auxiliaries, valued and utilized, but forever marked as other. This is important to understand because it reveals something fundamental about Tao psychology. Despite their talk of unity and the greater good encompassing all sentient species, there remains a distinction between Tao and not Tao. The castes are closed to outsiders not through prejudice but through biological reality. You cannot become fire caste if you were not born to it, and you cannot be born to it unless your parents were both fire caste. This creates an interesting paradox at the heart of Tao ideology. They genuinely believe that all species would benefit from embracing the greater good. They sincerely work toward unity and cooperation. But at the same time, their society is fundamentally organized around biological determinism. Your caste, determined at birth, defines your entire existence. There is no social mobility in the sense that humans understand it, no rising above one's station through individual effort. The system is rigid precisely because it is biological, the Imperium's truth. To understand what it means for a Tao to be raised by humans, we must also understand what humanity has become in the 41st millennium. The Imperium of Man is not the hopeful, rational civilization that the Emperor sought to build during the Great Crusade. It has devolved into a theocratic nightmare state, a galaxy-spanning empire held together by fanatical religious devotion, crushing bureaucracy, and xenophobic hatred so deep it has become a core tenet of faith. The average imperial citizen grows up indoctrinated with a simple truth. Aliens are the enemy of mankind. Not some aliens, not certain xenos species that have proven hostile, but all aliens everywhere by virtue of existing. The Imperial infantryman's uplifting primer distributed to countless billions of guardsmen, states it clearly and without nuance. Fear the alien, hate the alien, kill the alien. This is not presented as a military necessity or an unfortunate reality of galactic politics. It is presented as moral truth, as the will of the God Emperor himself. This xenophobia has deep historical roots. During the Age of Strife, when human civilization collapsed and warp storms isolated human worlds from each other for thousands of years, many alien species that had maintained peace treaties with humanity turned on their former allies. Human colonies were raided, enslaved, or simply exterminated by aliens who saw weakness and opportunity. The Emperor, when he emerged to unite humanity, pointed to these betrayals as evidence that aliens could never be trusted, that coexistence was impossible, that the galaxy belonged to humanity by right, and any alien presence was an affront to that destiny. But what the Emperor may have intended as a pragmatic, if harsh policy has, over 10,000 years, metastasized into religious dogma. The ecclesiarchy, the state church of the Imperium, teaches that aliens are not merely enemies, but spiritual abominations. To consort with Xenos is heresy, a sin against the God Emperor and against humanity itself. It marks you as spiritually corrupt, as having betrayed your own species. The punishment for xenophilia, as this crime is called, is death. Not a quick death, but the kind of death that the Inquisition specializes in. Death that serves as warning and example. The average imperial citizen on a civilized world will go their entire life without seeing a living alien unless that world comes under attack. Their knowledge of Xenos comes from propaganda images, from lurid illustrations in religious texts, showing grotesque caricatures of various alien species committing atrocities. Children learn their letters by reading simple primers that describe the various Xenos' threats to humanity in terms designed to inspire fear and hatred. By the time an imperial child reaches adolescence, the idea that an alien could be anything other than an enemy to be destroyed seems as absurd as suggesting that fire is cold or water is dry. This conditioning goes deeper than mere propaganda, however. It touches on fundamental aspects of how humans in the Imperium understand their place in the universe. The Imperial Creed teaches that humanity is special, chosen by the Emperor to rule the galaxy. It teaches that humans possess immortal souls, while aliens are soulless things, clever mimics of true life but fundamentally hollow. It teaches that to fall in battle against Xenos is glorious, but to allow a Xenos to live is shameful. These ideas are reinforced through every aspect of Imperial culture, from the sermons delivered in towering cathedrals to the stories parents tell their children at night. The Tau, in particular, represent a special kind of threat to Imperial ideology. Unlike orcs, who are obviously savage, or Tyranids, who are so alien that they barely register as life in any recognizable sense, the Tau are uncomfortably similar to humans in some ways. They build cities, develop technology, form governments. They can be reasoned with, negotiated with. They even allow humans to join their empire, treating them with more dignity and better living conditions than many humans experience under Imperial rule. This makes them especially dangerous from the Imperium's perspective because they represent a viable alternative, evidence that humanity's suffering is not inevitable, that a different path might be possible. Imperial propaganda works over time to paint the Tau as deceivers and manipulators, claiming that their offers of cooperation mask sinister intentions. They spread stories of human populations being sterilized, of Guevesa being used as cannon fodder, of terrible mind control inflicted upon those who accept Tau authority. Some of these stories may have grains of truth, blown out of proportion and twisted to serve propaganda purposes. Others are complete fabrications, designed to ensure that no Imperial citizen ever looks at the Tau as anything other than the enemy. In practice, Imperial policy towards Xenos varies depending on circumstances and location. The Inquisition, particularly the Ordo Xenos, maintains that any contact with aliens is dangerous and must be carefully controlled. But they also understand that absolute purity is impossible in a galaxy where humanity is surrounded by alien civilizations. Rogue traders are allowed to deal with Xenos, to trade, and even form temporary alliances, because their activities benefit the Imperium. Individual military commanders sometimes make battlefield truces with alien forces when facing a greater threat, though such arrangements are usually kept quiet and deniable. But for the average Imperial citizen, particularly those in the more civilized and controlled regions of the Imperium, the policy is simple. Xenos must be reported to the authorities immediately. To harbor a Xenos, to show it mercy, to fail to report its presence. These are all crimes, punishable by death, not just for the individual who commits the crime, but potentially for their entire family, their community, anyone who might have known and failed to report. The Imperium rules through fear as much as faith, and that fear extends to ensuring absolute compliance with xenophobic doctrine. This creates a terrible dilemma for anyone who might find themselves in possession of a Xenos infant. The moral thing, the humane thing, would be to care for the child, to raise it as best you can. But to do so invites destruction not just on yourself, but on everyone around you. Every day that the child lives is another day of mortal risk, another day where discovery could mean execution for you and everyone you care about. The pressure to simply eliminate the problem, to expose the child to the elements or deliver it to the authorities, would be overwhelming. And yet, humans are humans. For all the indoctrination, all the propaganda, all the religious fervor, humans remain capable of compassion, of seeing suffering and wanting to alleviate it. A crying infant, even one with blue skin and strange feet, triggers deep instincts that millions of years of evolution have hardwired into our brains. Not every human would make the choice to save the Tau child. Perhaps not even most humans, but some would, particularly if they were isolated enough from Imperial authority to believe they could get away with it, particularly if they were desperate or lonely, or simply stubborn enough to reject the authorities telling them what to do. So we arrive at our scenario. A human family, for whatever reason, makes the decision to raise a Tau infant as their own. Perhaps they are far enough from civilization that they believe they can hide the truth. Perhaps they are simply willing to take the risk, because the alternative, letting the child die, is something they cannot stomach. Whatever their reasoning, they now face a task that would challenge even the most dedicated caregiver. They must raise an alien child, keep its true nature secret, and somehow help it survive in a world that would kill it without hesitation if the truth were known. The first years. The infant's first memories would be confusion, though of course it would not have the language to describe them as such. The Tau child, assuming it survives the shock of being separated from its mother and any other Tau who might have been present at birth, would experience the world through senses that humans cannot fully share. Its first visual experiences would include colors that its human caregivers cannot perceive, infrared and ultraviolet frequencies that exist beyond human vision. The world would be painted in extra dimensions of light, patterns, and contrasts, invisible to the people trying to care for it. This creates an immediate and profound sense of isolation that the infant cannot articulate but certainly feels. Human infants derive enormous comfort from seeing their mother's face, from the visual recognition that connects them to their caregiver. But a Tau infant looking at a human face would see something fundamentally wrong. The eyes are positioned differently, too close together, and facing too directly forward. The nose protrudes in a way that seems grotesque, a fleshy projection where there should be smooth skin. The ears stick out from the sides of the head instead of lying flat. And most disturbingly, the whole face moves in ways that Tau faces don't. Muscles creating expressions that the infant has no instinctive ability to read. Human parents learn to interpret their infant's cries, to distinguish between hunger, pain, discomfort, and the need for contact. But a Tau infant's vocalizations would follow different patterns, pitch and rhythm shaped by a different vocal anatomy. The human caregivers would struggle to understand what the child needs, their instincts constantly leading them astray, because the signals they are reading don't correspond to familiar patterns. The child would cry and cry, unable to communicate its distress, and the parents would try everything they know, growing increasingly desperate as nothing seems to work. feeding would present its own unique challenges. Tau infants presumably nurse from their mothers like most mammalian species, but their nutritional needs might differ from human infants. Their digestive system, evolved on a different world with different biochemistry, might process proteins and sugars differently than human systems do. The human parents would have to experiment, trying different formulas and foods, watching anxiously for signs of illness or malnutrition, never quite sure if what they are providing is adequate. As the infant grows into a toddler, the physical differences become more pronounced and harder to hide. The hooved feet make learning to walk a different experience than it would be for a human child. The center of balance is different. The way weight distributes across those solid, ungulate feet requires different motor coordination. Human parents trying to help their Tau child learn to walk would find their own instincts almost useless. The techniques that work for human toddlers don't translate. The child falls in unexpected ways, struggles with balance in situations that seem easy for human children the same age. The four-fingered hands present their own challenges. Human tools, human toys, human everything is designed for five-fingered grip. A Tau child picking up a human toy finds it subtly wrong, the proportions not quite matching the natural grip. Learning to manipulate objects requires constant adaptation, constant compensation for having one fewer finger. Tasks that human children master easily become exercises in frustration. Buttons are harder to press, small objects harder to grasp. Fine motor control forever slightly impaired because the tools were not designed for this body. Language development would be perhaps the most complex challenge of all. Tau vocal anatomy differs from human anatomy in ways that affect phoneme production. Some sounds that humans make easily might be difficult or impossible for a Tau to reproduce accurately. Conversely, Tau language includes sounds that human vocal cords cannot make. The child, growing up speaking only human languages, would develop a noticeable accent, a way of speaking that sounds slightly off no matter how hard they try to match the sounds their human family makes. But more than the physical mechanics of speech, the Tau child would struggle with the conceptual frameworks embedded in human language. Human languages, particularly Low Gothic, as spoken across the Imperium, are saturated with religious and individualistic concepts that have no direct equivalent in Tau thought. Ideas about personal glory, individual salvation, suffering as a path to redemption, these would seem alien to a mind wired for collective good and practical cooperation. The child would learn the words, would memorize the phrases, but would struggle to fully grasp what they mean on an emotional level. Early childhood would be marked by a growing awareness of being different in ways that cannot be hidden or explained. The other children, in whatever community the family inhabits, would notice the strange skin color, the odd way of moving, the unusual hands and feet. If the family is on a frontier world, isolated from the full weight of imperial authority, they might concoct a story to explain these differences. Perhaps they claim the child has a rare mutation, an abhuman strain that results in these physical characteristics. Perhaps they say it is a medical condition, a disease that affected development in the womb. Whatever story they tell, it must be consistent and believable enough to prevent too many questions. But children are curious, and they are cruel. Young humans have not yet fully absorbed the social conditioning that teaches them to hide their observations and questions behind polite fictions. They would point and stare. They would ask loud, innocent questions that make the adults around them uncomfortable. Why does it have hooves? Why is its skin blue? Why does it only have 4 fingers? The Tau child would grow up as a spectacle, the weird kid, the one who is different in ways that invite constant commentary. This constant othering would shape the child's psychology profoundly. Human children develop self-concept partly through social mirroring, seeing themselves reflected in how others treat them. A Tau child, growing up among humans, would see itself reflected as strange, as wrong, as fundamentally different in ways that seem to matter to everyone around them. They would internalize the message that their body is not normal, that the way they move and speak and perceive the world marks them as lesser or broken. The human parents, no matter how loving, could not fully shield the child from this. They might tell the child that the differences don't matter, that they are loved regardless of how they look. But the child would see the way people stare, on the rare occasions they venture into public. They would hear the whispers, feel the judgment, and as they grow older and more aware, they would begin to understand the danger that their very existence represents a threat, not just to themselves, but to their family, living in an alien body. As the Tao child grows through childhood and into adolescence, the physical reality of inhabiting a body designed for a different world becomes increasingly apparent. Every day brings new reminders that this flesh, these bones, these senses were shaped by evolutionary pressures that have nothing to do with the environment they find themselves in. It is an experience of constant, low-level discomfort, like wearing clothes that almost fit but not quite, a shoe with a pebble that shifts just enough to avoid but never quite vanishes. The visual experience alone would be profoundly isolating. When the Tao child looks at a sunset, they see colors that no human eye can perceive. The infrared signature of heat bleeding off sun-warmed rocks, the ultraviolet patterns on flowers that human eyes cannot detect. These are part of the child's everyday visual reality. But they have no words to describe these colors, because human languages contain no terms for wavelengths that humans cannot see. Imagine trying to describe purple to someone who was born blind, and you begin to grasp the frustration of perceiving things that you cannot share, that you cannot even adequately name. This extends to reading human faces and body language. Human children learn from infancy to interpret the complex interplay of facial muscles that signals emotion. A raised eyebrow, a tightened lip, a crinkled nose. These micro-expressions communicate volumes in human social interaction. But Tao faces work differently. Their flatter facial structure, their more limited range of expression, means they evolved different ways of communicating emotion and intent. The Tao child, looking at human faces, would struggle to read these signals accurately. They would miss sarcasm, misinterpret anger as mere intensity, fail to recognize subtle signs of affection or disapproval. Conversely, whatever expressions the Tao child makes would not register correctly for human observers. When the child tries to show happiness, human onlookers might interpret it as confusion. When the child is distressed, humans might think they are simply tired. This creates a constant wall of miscommunication, where the child's internal emotional state and their external presentation fail to align in ways that others can understand. They would be accused of being cold or unfeeling, when in reality, they are expressing emotion in a language that their audience cannot read. The lack of depth perception that comes from their pupil structure would make certain activities difficult or dangerous. Human children learn to judge distances instinctively, calibrating their reaches and jumps through constant practice. But the Tao child's eyes, unable to dilate and contract like human pupils, would struggle with this in ways that human vision instructors would not understand how to correct. They would be clumsy in ways that seem baffling, misjudging simple reaches, struggling with tasks that require precise distance estimation. The hooved feet would be a constant source of difficulty and comment. Human shoes are designed for feet with separate toes, with ankle articulation that works differently than what the Tao child possesses. Every shoe would need to be custom-made or significantly modified, and even then, they would not fit correctly. The child would likely go barefoot as much as possible, but this itself would draw attention and comment. In the Imperium, where conformity is next to godliness, such visible difference would be dangerous. Walking on human-designed surfaces, stairs with dimensions calculated for human stride length, floors with textures that humans find comfortable but which feel wrong under hooves, doorways positioned at heights that assume human proportions. All of this would require constant adaptation. The child would be forever adjusting, calculating, compensating for environments that were not built with their body in mind. It would be exhausting in ways that are difficult for the naturally proportioned to understand, a constant mental and physical effort just to navigate spaces that humans take for granted. The four-fingered hands would present similar challenges. Human technology, from door handles to writing implements to eating utensils, is designed for five-fingered manipulation. The Tao child would need to develop compensatory techniques for everything: writing with a pen or stylus, holding a cup, using tools. All of these would require conscious thought and effort, where human children develop automatic motor patterns. They would be slower, clumsier, forever struggling with fine motor tasks in ways that would invite impatience and criticism from human teachers and peers. Temperature regulation would feel subtly wrong. Tau skin, evolved on a world with different climate patterns, would experience Earth-normal temperatures differently than human skin does. The child might feel comfortable at temperatures that humans find slightly too warm or too cool. They would want to wear different clothing than their peers, seeking or avoiding layers in ways that seem odd to human observers. Well-meaning human parents would insist they bundle up or lighten their clothing based on what feels right for human physiology, leaving the Tau child either too warm or too cold, uncomfortable in ways they struggle to articulate. Their sense of smell and taste, processed through olfactory organs located in the mouth, would create a different experience of food and environmental odors. Flavors that humans find distinct might blend together for the Tau palate, while subtle differences that humans cannot detect would be obvious and significant to the Tau child. They would have strong food preferences that make no sense to their human family, refusing dishes that humans find delicious while craving combinations that humans find bizarre. Well-meaning human parents trying to provide balanced nutrition would struggle to understand what their child actually needs versus what they are simply being picky about. As the child reaches adolescence, the physical changes of puberty would further complicate matters. Tau mature faster than humans, reaching adulthood in their mid-teens rather than early 20s. This means the Tau child would undergo puberty at perhaps 12 or 13 standard years, while their human peers are just beginning this process. The physical and psychological changes would happen faster, more intensely, leaving the child feeling even more out of sync with the people around them. They would be dealing with adult emotions and urges while their peers are still children, creating yet another layer of isolation and incomprehension. The shorter lifespan that awaits them, though not yet apparent in childhood, would begin to make itself felt as they mature. Tau live roughly 40 years on average, less than half a human lifespan. This means they age faster, their bodies wearing down at a rate that would seem premature and disturbing to human observers. A Tau in their late 20s would show signs of aging that humans don't develop until their 40s or 50s. This compressed existence means they would feel urgency that their human peers cannot understand, a need to accomplish and achieve burning inside them, while humans, their same chronological age, seem content to drift and explore. The lack of any psychic presence in the warp, that roiling sea of chaotic energy that underlies reality, would make the Tau child fundamentally invisible to certain detection methods. If Imperial Inquisitors searched for hidden Xenos using psychic detection, they would pass right by the Tau child without registering their presence. This might be one of the few advantages to their situation, one of the few ways in which being Tau, rather than any other alien species, would make hiding slightly easier. But it would also mean they could never develop any psychic abilities, never touch the powers that some rare humans possess, forever cut off from that aspect of human experience. All of these physical differences would accumulate into a comprehensive experience of wrongness, of inhabiting a body that does not fit the world it finds itself in. The child would grow up hyper-aware of their own flesh, constantly monitoring how they move, how they sound, how they appear to others. Every gesture would be calculated, every expression carefully controlled, trying to minimize the